You've felt it before. That quiet certainty that you're meant for something more. That beneath the surface of your ordinary life, there's a destiny waiting, a calling, a purpose that will finally make sense of why you feel so different, so restless, so special. Maybe it hit you watching a movie, the moment Neo realizes he's the one, or when Harry Potter discovers he's a wizard, or when you finished reading a book where some unremarkable person learns they're actually the key to saving the world, and for a moment, just a moment, you felt it. That electric recognition. That could be me. That should be me. It's not a childish fantasy. It feels deeper than that, more real. Like remembering something you've always known but forgotten. Like waking up from a long sleep. We're drowning in a culture that tells us we're all meant to be extraordinary. Every podcast, every self-help book, every hustle culture guru screaming the same gospel. You are the hero of your story. You are meant to disrupt, to lead, to leave a legacy. The algorithm feeds you stories of people who were once ordinary, just like you, until they discovered their true calling. The entrepreneur who dropped out and changed everything. The artist who was rejected until the world finally saw their genius. The thought leader who cracked the code everyone else missed. And it feels good, doesn't it? To believe you're the exception. To believe that your dissatisfaction isn't just dissatisfaction, it's a sign. That your restlessness isn't just restlessness. It's destiny knocking. That your feeling of not fitting in isn't just social awkwardness. It's proof you were meant for something bigger. But Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the depths of the human psyche, who spent decades exploring the unconscious mind, had a warning that almost no one talks about. A warning so important that ignoring it has destroyed countless lives, turned visionaries into tyrants and transformed genuine seekers into hollow shells, performing a version of enlightenment they don't actually feel. That fantasy isn't your calling. It's your cage. Jung called it inflation, the unconscious identification with the hero archetype. And he said it was one of the most dangerous traps on the path to becoming whole. Because here's the truth most people never hear. The truth that gets buried under a mountain of motivational content and personal branding advice and destiny rhetoric. The need to be chosen isn't about destiny. It's about ego, and ego inflation, disguised as purpose, dressed up as ambition, masquerading as self-actualization, will destroy you from the inside out. The seduction of the myth. Let's start with why this myth is so intoxicating. Why it feels true even when some part of us knows better. Joseph Campbell famously mapped what he called the hero's journey, the monomyth that appears in stories across every culture and era. From ancient Sumerian epics to modern superhero films, the pattern is always the same. An ordinary person receives a call to adventure. They resist at first, comfortable in their familiar world. But eventually, something forces them to cross the threshold into an unknown world. They face trials. They meet allies and enemies. They descend into the deepest cave, confront the greatest danger, and return home transformed, bringing some gift or wisdom back to their community. It's the story of Moses, receiving the call at the burning bush, descending into Egypt, confronting Pharaoh, and leading his people to freedom. It's the story of Buddha, leaving the palace, sitting under the Bodhi tree, confronting Mara, and returning with the Dharma. It's the story of Christ, going into the wilderness, facing temptation, dying and resurrecting, and giving humanity a new covenant. It's the story of every superhero, every fantasy protagonist, every startup founder profiled in Fast Company, every TEDx speaker, sharing their journey from rock bottom to revelation, and Campbell, drawing heavily from Jung's work on archetypes and the collective unconscious, said this: the hero's journey isn't really about external adventure. It's a map of internal transformation, the hero's descent into the underworld. That's the journey into your unconscious, the parts of your psyche you've been avoiding. The dragon they must face, that's your shadow. All the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, repressed, or been taught to hide. The treasure they bring back, that's integration, wholeness, the union of conscious and unconscious. What Jung called individuation. It's beautiful, right? It makes perfect sense. The journey isn't about slaying literal dragons. It's about confronting your inner demons. It's not about saving the kingdom. It's about healing your fragmented self. It's not about being chosen by external forces. It's about choosing to wake up to who you really are. Except here's what happened. Here's where everything went wrong. We stopped reading it as metaphor. We started living it as instruction manual. The hero's journey was always meant to be a symbolic process, an interior transformation that happens in the soul, in the depths of consciousness. But modern culture externalized it, literalized it, turned it into a recipe for worldly success. Somewhere along the way, descending into the underworld became finding your passion. Facing the dragon became disrupting the industry. Bringing back the treasure became building your personal brand. The death and rebirth became your comeback story. We took a map of spiritual transformation and turned it into a business model. Now we don't integrate the hero archetype. We identify with it. We think, if I'm not the founder, I'm nobody. If I'm not the disruptor, I'm irrelevant. If I'm not leaving a legacy, building an empire, changing the game, what's the point of any of this? We measure our lives not by depth of character, but by metrics of exceptionality. Not by how whole we are, but by how special we appear. And this is where Jung's warning becomes absolutely critical, because identification with the hero, believing you are special, chosen, destined, isn't growth, it's inflation. And inflation is the shadow side of the hero myth that nobody wants to talk about. The dark underbelly of the personal development industry, the poison hidden in the motivational medicine, the trap of inflation. So what exactly is inflation? In Jungian psychology, inflation happens when your ego, your conscious sense of self, identifies with an archetype. An archetype is a universal pattern from the collective unconscious, a primordial image that shapes human experience across time and culture. The hero is an archetype. So is the sage, the lover, the mother, the trickster. These are patterns bigger than any individual person. They're templates that have existed as long as humanity has been telling stories. When you're psychologically healthy, you relate to archetypes. You experience them, learn from them, integrate their lessons. You might feel the call of the hero in certain moments, the wisdom of the sage in others. You dance with these energies without losing yourself in them. But when you inflate, you stop relating to the archetype. You become possessed by it. You confuse the pattern for your personal identity. Your ego, which is meant to be the small center of consciousness, suddenly swells to encompass something much larger than itself. It's like a cup trying to contain the ocean. The boundaries blur. You start believing, I'm not like other people. I see what they don't see. I understand what they can't grasp. I'm awake and they're asleep. I'm evolved and they're stuck. I'm destined for something they could never understand. Sound familiar? Maybe you've felt it yourself. Or maybe you've watched someone else go through it. The moment they discovered meditation, or psychedelics, or entrepreneurship, or some philosophical framework, and suddenly they're speaking like a prophet. Suddenly they're separate, above, chosen. Jung saw this pattern everywhere. In his patients who came to him drowning in anxiety and depression, in the religious movements that claimed special revelation, in the political leaders who believed they alone could save their people. And he said this, in words that should be carved into the entrance of every self-help seminar and startup accelerator. Identification with the hero leads to inflation, which is the opposite of self-realization. Let me say that again because it's the most important sentence in this entire script. Inflation is the opposite of self-realization, not a step toward it, not a phase you pass through. The opposite, the antithesis, the thing that prevents individuation from ever happening. When you inflate, you don't grow. You split. You separate yourself from the collective, from ordinary humanity, from the shared struggles and fears and hopes that connect every person who has ever lived. And in doing so, you lose the very thing that makes transformation possible. You lose humility. Here's what inflation actually looks like in practice. Not in theory, not in Jungian textbooks, but in the lived experience of someone caught in its grip. You start measuring your worth by differentiation, by how you're not like everyone else. You need to be the smartest person in the room, the most woke, the most awakened, the hardest worker, the deepest thinker, the most authentic. You can't just enjoy something anymore. You need to have the most refined taste. You can't just do good work. You need to be recognized as exceptional. You can't just be kind. You need to be seen as more evolved than those who haven't done their shadow work. You stop learning, because learning requires admitting you don't know. And if you don't know, maybe you're not as special as you thought. You stop connecting deeply, because real connection requires vulnerability. And vulnerability requires admitting you're just as scared, just as confused, just as human as everyone else. You stop listening, because listening requires that other people, ordinary people, unchosen people, might have something valuable to teach you. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to prove your chosenness. Every relationship becomes transactional. What can this person do for my journey, my brand, my destiny? And beneath all of it, beneath the grandiosity, the ambition, the relentless need to prove you're special, is terror. A terror so profound you can barely look at it. Because if you're not special, then what are you? If you're not the chosen one, then maybe you're just ordinary, mediocre, forgettable, small, one of billions who will live and die without anyone remembering their name. And that thought is unbearable. So you inflate bigger, you chase harder, you perform louder, you curate more carefully. You build a personal brand around your uniqueness, your journey, your special perspective. You post about your morning routine, your productivity hacks, your unconventional wisdom. You humble brag about how much you've sacrificed for your vision. You drop hints about the big things you're working on that you can't talk about yet. You're not just living life anymore. You're narrating it, editing it, turning every moment into content, every struggle into a character arc, every failure into a setup for your comeback story. But here's what Jung understood with devastating clarity. The need to be special is just the fear of being nothing. And that fear, that unacknowledged terror of ordinariness, of mortality, of insignificance, becomes a black hole at the center of your life. Everything gets pulled into it. Your relationships, your work, your sense of self, your ability to experience genuine joy. You can't rest, because resting means you're not achieving. And if you're not achieving, you're not proving your worth. And if you're not proving your worth, maybe you don't have any. You can't enjoy the present moment, because the present moment doesn't make you special. Only the future, the imagined future where you finally made it, where everyone finally sees what you knew all along. Only that matters. You can't just be, because being isn't enough. Being is what ordinary people do, and you're not ordinary. You can't be ordinary. If you're ordinary, then what was the point of all this suffering, all this striving, all this sacrifice? Jung called this loss of soul, the spiritual price of identifying with the hero. You think you're becoming more, bigger, greater, more yourself, but actually, you're becoming less human, less connected, less real. You're disappearing into the role, dying into the performance, losing your actual self while claiming to have found it. And here's the cruelest irony of all. The more you need to be chosen, the more enslaved you become. Enslaved to comparison, to metrics, to validation, to the algorithm, to the exhausting, never-ending performance of exceptionality. You think the chosen one is free? But the chosen one is the least free person in the story. The chosen one can't fail, can't doubt, can't rest, can't be vulnerable, can't admit they don't know, can't ask for help, can't just be human. The chosen one is trapped in the role, and the role demands everything. The shadow of specialness. Now let's go deeper. Because the fantasy of being chosen doesn't just inflate the ego, it creates a shadow. And this shadow, this dark twin of the hero myth, is where things get truly dangerous. Every archetype has a light side and a dark side. The hero can liberate, or the hero can tyrannize. The wise one can enlighten, or the wise one can manipulate. The lover can connect, or the lover can possess. The same energy that rescues can also dominate. The same force that breaks chains can also forge them. And when you identify with the hero without integrating its shadow, you become capable of extraordinary cruelty, all while believing you're the good guy. Jung wrote, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow. The more convinced you are of your own goodness, your own awakening, your own chosenness, the more blind you become to the darkness you're casting. So what lives in the shadow of the chosen one fantasy? What poison grows in the soil of specialness? Envy. If I'm chosen, then there must be others who aren't. The world divides into the chosen and the unchosen, the awake and the asleep, the players and the NPCs. And if someone else seems more chosen than me, more successful, more recognized, more celebrated, more special, then I don't just feel inadequate. I feel rage, a hot, bitter rage that I have to hide, even from myself. Because the chosen one isn't supposed to feel envy. The hero isn't supposed to care about what others have. But the inflated ego can't tolerate peers. It needs hierarchy. It needs to be above, ahead, beyond. And when it's not, when someone else gets the recognition, the opportunity, the audience, the shadow emerges. Resentment, rationalization, schadenfreude, that secret pleasure when someone else fails, when someone else's mask slips, when someone else proves they weren't so special after all. You tell yourself you're glad for them. You perform gratitude and celebration. But underneath, you're keeping score, calculating, comparing, seething, contempt. If I'm awake and they're asleep, if I see the truth and they're lost in illusion, if I've done the work and they're still unconscious, then they're not just different from me, they're beneath me. This is the shadow of spiritual inflation, intellectual inflation, moral inflation. You think you're more evolved, more aware, more ethical. And that belief, that conviction of your own superiority, gives you permission to judge, to dismiss, to dehumanize. The person who disagrees with you isn't just wrong. They're unconscious, unawakened, not ready for the truth you've grasped. The person who doesn't appreciate your work isn't just uninterested. They're shallow, asleep, stuck in the matrix. The person who questions you isn't just skeptical. They're threatened by your growth, jealous of your authenticity, afraid of the mirror you're holding up. You stop seeing people. You start seeing categories, levels, tiers of consciousness. You stop having conversations. You start diagnosing others, fixing them, saving them from themselves. And all the while, you're convinced you're being compassionate, helpful, generous with your hard-won wisdom. You don't see that you've recreated the very hierarchy you claim to have transcended. You don't see that your enlightenment looks suspiciously like elitism, entitlement. If I'm meant for something great, then the world owes me recognition, opportunity, success, an audience, resources, validation. I've done the work. I've paid my dues. I've suffered and grown and transformed. I've answered the call. Now where's my reward? And when it doesn't come, when you're not discovered, not celebrated, not chosen by the external world the way you've chosen yourself, you do not examine your assumptions. You blame the world for not seeing your worth. The gatekeepers are threatened by you. The algorithm is rigged against authenticity. People aren't ready for what you have to offer. Society is still too asleep to recognize the awakened. You can't accept that maybe, just maybe, you're not as special as you thought, that your ideas aren't as original, that your work isn't as profound, that you're not the exception, the chosen one, the prophet crying in the wilderness. Because accepting that would mean confronting the unbearable truth. You're ordinary. Just another person trying to make sense of this confusing, painful, beautiful experience of being alive. And the inflated ego can't survive that realization. Jung saw this pattern again and again in the patients who came to him. People who'd built their entire identity around being special. The misunderstood genius, the wounded healer, the revolutionary thinker. And then reality didn't cooperate. They weren't discovered. Their book didn't change the world. Their startup failed. Their audience never materialized. Their big break never came. And rather than grieve the fantasy, rather than let the inflation deflate and discover who they actually are beneath the role, they doubled down. They inflated further. They found new ways to prove their chosenness. They created more elaborate narratives about why the world wasn't ready for them yet, or they collapsed entirely into depression, into addiction, into rage, into conspiracy theories that explain why the special people never get their due. Because here's what no one tells you about the chosen one narrative. It sets you up to fail. Not because you're not talented, not because you're not driven, not because you don't have something valuable to offer, but because it's built on a lie. The lie that your worth depends on being extraordinary, on standing out, on being more than, better than, different from everyone else. And that lie, no matter how beautifully it's packaged, no matter how many success stories seem to prove it, will hollow you out from the inside. It will turn you into someone you don't recognize, someone you don't even like, someone performing a version of heroism while losing their actual humanity, the real journey. So if the hero's journey is a trap, if identification with the chosen one destroys rather than develops, what's the alternative? Jung spent his entire life answering this question, and his answer was radical, revolutionary, and completely opposite to everything our culture teaches. The goal isn't to become a hero. The goal is to become whole. He called this process individuation. And it's not what most people think. It's not what the self-help books describe. It's not what the gurus are selling. Individuation isn't about self-improvement. It's not about optimizing yourself or becoming the best version of yourself or unlocking your potential or living your purpose. Those are ego games. Inflation disguised as growth. Individuation is about integration. It means bringing together all the parts of yourself you've been at war with. The parts you're ashamed of. The parts you've denied. The parts that don't fit the hero narrative. The parts that aren't special, aren't exceptional, aren't chosen. Your weakness, your neediness, your ordinariness, your pettiness, your laziness, your mediocrity, your fear, your doubt, your confusion, your need for rest, your need for help, your need for connection, your interdependence, your fragility, your mortality, your smallness in the face of the vast, incomprehensible universe. Individuation means looking at all of it, the light and the shadow, the exceptional and the ordinary, the parts you love and the parts you hate, and saying, "This is me, all of it, and I don't need to be more than this." Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you wish you were, not who you're supposed to be, not who Instagram tells you to be, or who your parents wanted you to be, or who the culture says you should become. Not the hero, the chosen one, the exception, the disruptor. Just you, the actual you, in all your complicated, contradictory, imperfect humanity." And here's the paradox that almost no one grasps, the truth that gets buried under mountains of personal development content. You can't become whole while trying to be special. Because specialness requires separation. It requires you to be different from, better than, above everyone else. But wholeness requires belonging. It requires you to accept that you're part of something larger than yourself, that you're connected to every human who's ever lived, that you share the same fundamental fears, the same core desires, the same basic struggles. You're not the exception to the human condition. You are the human condition. And when you finally accept that, when you stop running from your ordinariness, when you stop performing your specialness, when you let the inflation deflate and discover what remains, something shocking happens. You become free. Free from the exhausting performance of exceptionality. free from the need to constantly prove yourself, justify yourself, validate yourself, free from comparison, from envy, from the terror of being forgotten, free from the pressure of destiny, the weight of purpose, the burden of having to change the world. You're free to do good work without needing it to make you special. You're free to love people without needing them to validate you or reflect your greatness. You're free to fail, to stumble, to not know, and still know you're enough. You're free to rest without guilt, to enjoy without optimization, to simply be without having to narrate it for an audience. Because you're not trying to be a hero anymore. You're just trying to be real. Jung had another word for this state. He called it the self, capital S. Not the small ego that needs to be special, but the self that already is. The self that includes your ego but isn't defined by it. The self that's connected to everyone and everything. The self that was there before you learned to perform, before you started curating, before you believed you needed to be chosen. And here's what he said about it. The self is not found by seeking it, but by ceasing to seek. You don't find wholeness by chasing it. You find it by stopping, by letting go, by giving up the quest to be more, better, special. You find it by finally allowing yourself to be ordinary, freedom beyond the myth. Let me be clear about something because I know the objection that's forming in your mind right now. No. But what about ambition? What about dreams? What about wanting to do great work, to contribute something meaningful, to make a difference? Are you saying we should just give up and be mediocre? That we should abandon our goals and settle for a small, unremarkable life? No. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying something much more nuanced, much more important. Ambition is fine. Needing to be special is poison. You can want to make great work. You can want to contribute. You can want to create something meaningful, something that helps people, something that lasts beyond your lifetime. But the why matters. The motivation matters. The energy behind the action matters. Are you creating because the work itself calls to you? Because you genuinely want to solve this problem, explore this question, make this beauty? Or are you creating because you need it to prove you're exceptional? Because you need the recognition, the validation, the confirmation that you're not ordinary after all? Are you building because you genuinely want to solve a problem in the world? Because you see suffering and want to reduce it, see confusion and want to bring clarity? Or are you building because you need the status that comes with being a founder, the narrative arc of being a disruptor, the hero's journey of going from nothing to something? Are you teaching because you love the subject, because you want to pass on knowledge that matters, that helps, that illuminates? Or are you teaching because you need to be seen as the expert, the authority, the one who knows what others don't? The work itself will tell you the truth. If you can do it anonymously and still feel fulfilled, if you can create something beautiful that no one ever knows came from you and still feel satisfaction, it's real work. It's coming from the self, not the inflated ego. But if you need an audience to make it meaningful, if you need recognition to feel like it matters, if you need credit to feel like it was worth doing, it's not about the work. It's about proving you're special. If you can fail at it and still find value in the attempt. If you can try something, have it not work, and still feel like the effort taught you something, connected you to something, made you more human, it's real. But if failure would shatter your identity, if not succeeding would mean you're nobody, if the work only matters if it makes you exceptional, it's inflation. If you can genuinely celebrate someone else's success in the same field, if you can see someone doing similar work and feel inspired rather than threatened, curious rather than envious, connected rather than competitive, it's real. But if their success feels like your failure, if their recognition feels like theft, if you can't help but calculate how they're less deserving, less talented, less authentic than you, it's the shadow of specialness speaking. Jung wasn't against achievement. He achieved extraordinary things himself, developed a revolutionary psychological framework, wrote books that changed how we understand the human mind, helped countless people through their darkest moments. But he did it while remaining brutally, ruthlessly honest about his own limitations, his own shadow, his own ordinariness. He didn't pretend to have all the answers. He didn't position himself as enlightened or awakened or evolved. He didn't build a cult of personality or claim special access to truth. He wrote, "I am no prophet. I am an ordinary man." An ordinary man who did extraordinary work, not because he was chosen, not because he was destined, but because he was awake to his own wholeness. He integrated his shadow instead of denying it. He acknowledged his limitations instead of inflating past them. He remained connected to ordinary humanity instead of separating himself into specialness. And that's the real secret. That's the path that almost no one talks about. You don't become capable of great work by convincing yourself you're special. You become capable of great work by accepting that you're not. Because acceptance of your ordinariness frees up all the energy you were using to maintain the performance. All the energy you were burning trying to prove your worth. All the energy you were wasting on comparison, on envy, on the exhausting calculation of whether you're ahead or behind. That energy, freed from the prison of specialness, can actually go into the work itself. So here's what freedom beyond the myth actually looks like. Here's what life becomes when you finally let go of needing to be chosen. You stop waiting to be discovered. You stop checking if today's the day someone finally recognizes your genius, your potential, your special quality. You start doing what needs doing right here with what you have. Not because it will make you special, but because it's what's in front of you, because it's what you can offer, because it's what feels true. You stop curating your life for an imaginary audience. You stop turning every moment into content, every experience into a story, every struggle into character development. You start living it for its own sake. You start experiencing things fully because you're actually present, not because you're already narrating how you'll share this later, how this fits into your journey, how this proves your authenticity. You stop asking, "What's my unique purpose?" You stop agonizing over your one true calling, your special mission, your distinct contribution that no one else can make. You start asking, "What's needed here right now that I can offer? What's needed in my family, in my community, in my work? What small thing can I do today that helps, that serves, that connects?" Not because it will make you special, but because it's needed, because you're here, because you can. You stop trying to be remembered. You stop worrying about your legacy, your mark, your lasting impact on the world. You start accepting that you're already part of something eternal, the endless chain of humanity, the vast web of connection, the eternal cycle of people loving and suffering and creating and dying and being forgotten, each person contributing their small piece to the whole. Not trying to stand out from it, trying to belong to it. And in that acceptance, in that deep, difficult, liberating acceptance of your own ordinariness, something miraculous happens. You become truly useful, not because you're special, but because you're present, not because you're chosen, but because you chose to show up, not because you're the hero, but because you're awake to what's real. Jung called this the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between ego and self, between ambition and humility, between wanting to matter and accepting that you're already part of something that matters infinitely more than your individual story. It's the ability to work hard without inflating, to create meaningfully without needing recognition, to contribute genuinely without calculating your specialness. It's the ability to be ambitious and humble at the same time, driven and at peace, striving and accepting. That's the real hero's journey. Not the one Campbell mapped, not the one Hollywood sells, not the one the personal development industry markets. The real journey is learning to live fully without needing to be special, to work deeply without needing to be recognized, to love generously without needing to be exceptional, to simply be here, present, awake, connected, and let that be enough. You are not the chosen one, and that's not a tragedy. That's not a limitation. That's not a diminishment. It's your liberation. The hero's journey was never meant to make you special. It was never meant to separate you from the rest of humanity. It was never meant to inflate your ego or confirm your uniqueness or prove you are destined for greatness. It was meant to make you whole. And wholeness doesn't come from ascending above everyone else. It doesn't come from being chosen, being exceptional, being the one. It comes from descending back into your humanity, from embracing the parts of yourself you've been trying to transcend, from accepting that you're ordinary, beautifully, terribly, gloriously ordinary, just like everyone else who's ever lived. Jung wrote this toward the end of his life, after decades of exploring the depths of the psyche, after helping thousands of people through their psychological crises, after developing a framework that would influence psychology, spirituality, and culture for generations. I am astonished, disappointed, pleased with myself. I am distressed, depressed, rapturous. I am all these things at once and cannot add up the sum. That's not the voice of a hero. That's not the voice of someone who's transcended their humanity. That's the voice of someone who became real, someone who stopped performing wholeness and started living it, someone who accepted that being human means being contradictory, complicated, impossible to summarize, someone who gave up the fantasy of being chosen and discovered something much more valuable, the freedom to simply be. And maybe, just maybe, that's what we're all actually looking for. Not to be chosen, not to be special, not to be the one who saves the world or changes the game or leaves a legacy, but to finally stop performing, to put down the crushing weight of exceptionality, to release ourselves from the prison of specialness, and to just be ordinary, be human, be connected to everyone who's ever felt inadequate, ever struggled, ever wondered if they matter. Be part of the whole instead of separate from it. Be real instead of special. You were never chosen, but you can choose to awaken, not to your destiny, not to your purpose, not to your specialness, but to your wholeness, to your humanity, to the ordinary, beautiful, sufficient miracle of simply being here. That's the real journey. And it's available to you right now. Not someday when you've achieved enough. Not when you've proven yourself or built your legacy or been recognized. Right now. In your ordinariness, in your imperfection, in your shared, common, universal humanity. The cage was always unlocked. You just had to stop believing you were too special to walk through the same door as everyone else.